Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As always, just a huge thank you to you all. Now, just a couple of things before we get into today's video. I'm aware with this case that there was no criminal conviction. There was no, technically, there wasn't a crime committed. The reason I'm doing this is I strongly believe, from reading what I've read, from listening to what I've listened to, I do believe Tim's luck would have run out eventually, and there was going to be some sort of criminal conviction. There would be some legality put in to what he was doing, and it was a shame for all intents and purposes. You know, he was trying to do something good. He was trying to save these animals from being cold, from being poached. And it's kind of come, this video has sort of come at a weird time, because more and more over the past few days, I've been reading, about the shark attacks that have been happening in Australia recently. And only yesterday I was reading some comments and people literally requesting and ordering the culling of sharks just so they can go in the ocean. And this is kind of what happens at the end of this story. The animals that Tim was trying to protect ended up being shot, and it's kind of what happens when we invade a wild animal space. They kind of become really too used to humans and start approaching humans, and they end up losing their lives over it. So the main reason for doing this video is just to highlight, you have a special interest in the animals. I do. I love learning about nature and wild animals, but I'm not going to go encroach on, say, run into pride lions, for example, even though I love big cats, as you can tell by the leopard print. But I'm not going to go encroach on pride of lions or whatnot. So just a massive thank you to you all, everyone listening. The other thing I want to say is obviously about the comments on my last video. You might notice that someone did comment. The reason that they commented was the way that I read some of the stuff I put into my video. So when it came down to the final act of what Myra and Ian did to Edward Evans, when I was reading when I read David Smith's words, it sounded to me like a certain way, and it wasn't the case at all. So I just want to point that out. I just want to apologise for any misinformation. But I'm really grateful, for the person that did comment to highlight that out. So thank you so much. So with all that said and done, I'm just going to get into the story of Timothy Treadwell. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment and I'm going to play you some clips to introduce who we are going to be discussing today.
I'm out in the prime cut of the Big Green. Behind me is Ed and Rowdy, members of an up-and-coming sub-adult gang. They're challenging everything, including me. Goes with the territory. If I show weakness, if I retreat, I may be hurt, I may be killed. I must hold my own if I'm going to stay within this land. For once there is weakness, they will exploit it, they will take me out, they will decapitate me, they will chop me into bits and pieces. I'm dead. So far.
Okay, so Timothy, he was born as Timothy William Dexter on April 29th, 1957, and these were to his parents Val Dexter and Carol Ann. He grew up in Mineola, which is a little suburb on Long Island, New York, and he had 4 other siblings. He attended Connecticut High School, where he was said to have been the swimming team's best diver. This was the subject that he really excelled at. His mum said that, he was an average student. He would get B's and not A's. He was a good student, but he wasn't the best. As a child, he showed a real aptitude and passion for animals. He adopted a squirrel as a child, and he named his squirrel Willie. And he formed quite a close bond with this squirrel. Just a side note, I have read a couple of books on Timothy. I wasn't able to find a copy of the book that he actually wrote with his co-author, which we're going to go into a little bit later. But there was a couple of other books of people that did actually meet him in real life, and I also watched the documentary Grizzly Man, which, if you haven't seen, please go and see. It is a really decent watch. So, Val and Carol, they said that their son was just basically just average, ordinary man, and this seemed to have changed around the time that he started going to university. So he attended Bradley University in Illinois. He was on a swimming and diving scholarship, and he unfortunately had to drop out from this scholarship after injuring his back. But he was noted at university to start inventing really tall tales about himself. He at first would describe that he was from the UK. He was a British orphan, but then this later changed to him coming from Australia. And some people said that he would adopt sort of like faux Aussie accent. He said that he was born in a small village or a small town in the outbacks of Australia. So after leaving university, he moves over to Los Angeles, and his dad said that he had the aspirations of becoming an actor. And he auditions for roles, and he comes really, really close to securing the role of Woody. Woody being a character on the sitcom Cheers. He later goes on to be played by Woody Harrelson. And this, his dad said, really, really affected him. Around 84, 85, he changes his name from Timothy Dexter to Timothy Treadwell, and the reason for this is probably like a stage name thing. You know, the alliteration just seems to work quite well with it when it comes to a stage name. And after losing the role of Woody, he seemed to develop a couple of addiction problems. So he started off with alcohol, but he begins making changes after this, and eventually this progresses on to him taking heroin and cocaine. Particularly, he mixes them together into something called a speedball, and he ends up having a real near-fatal overdose on this. On another occasion, he ends up accidentally falling off a balcony in a hotel. Now, it's during this time he meets a lady called Jewel Palavac, and she becomes his closest friend, she becomes his confidant, and for a short while the two are in a relationship. So they both started working at a restaurant called Gulliver's. Now, this was a medieval themed seafood restaurant in Los Angeles, and their sort of meeting happened when both of them had been involved in separate misdemeanors, and they end up being called into the manager's office. Jules said that hers was putting too much lighter fluids on a particular piece of cooking equipment to sort of put on a show for her guests, because they kept requesting it, and all of a sudden it was whoosh, like massive fire, and she got called into the office for this. So she goes in. This is when she first meets Timothy. She asks him what he's done, and he reciprocates. She reiterates what she did, and he's like, "Oh my god, that was you!" Like really excited. He just sort of like, I was like childlike glee, sort of like, you know, "Oh my god, I can't believe that was you. You did that." And they end up dating for around 3 years after this. They live together, but the relationship later breaks down due to Tim's alcohol abuse. And Joel said at this time, he was a lot of fun. He was a really cool, really fun guy. But when he drank, that's when the fun stopped. And she goes on to say that obviously how difficult it is to live with an alcoholic. She said that he would reach the point of not being fun anymore, and he would just stay up all night drinking. Now, in the summer of 1989, he basically gets told that, okay, take yourself off to here and sort of treat it like rehab. He gets the opportunity to go visit Alaska for the first time. And so he jumps on his motorbike and he rides from California to Alaska. And this is around, looking on Google Maps, it says it's around a 3-day journey. He visits a place called Wrangell St. Elias, and this is where he has his first encounter with a coastal brown bear. Now, I just want to reiterate that whilst the bears in Alaska are called grizzly bears, they're not true grizzly bears. They are actually coastal brown bears. He describes in his diary that the encounter was like looking into a mirror. He said that he felt like he gazed into a kindred spirit almost. That being, he knew the potential danger of being that close to a bear. And he said that in reality he was really scared. However, this didn't stop him. He sets up his tent in Katmai National Park. And this is in the area known as Hollow Bay. And Hollow Bay was deemed a lot safer than what we're going to eventually start discussing. However, early on, Tim was facing a lot of opposition, and the park rangers would pull him up over various misdemeanors, and they were worried about him getting potentially too close to the bears. Even back in the 80s, you know, even though they didn't have a poacher issue at this point, a bear hadn't been poached in Katmai since 1970, the last one. They were kind of worried about the bears being habitualized to humans and getting too close, and in that way they would have to start a culling operation. So he would move his tent later on. So later on down the line, the more he kept visiting, so he made 13 summer trips to Kaffir Bay. So he would start off in the hollow grounds, and then he would move on to a place called Grizzly Maze. And Grizzly Maze was seen as a lot more dangerous. He would get Joel to sort out dropping off a food parcel with a mutual friend of theirs called Willie Fulton, who was a pilot. Now, the particular area, so Grizzly Maze, that was only first discovered due to an oil spill. This was in 1989, and this chance encounter, a lot of people were coming down because there was a large number of bears being recorded in this area, and so people would come down to do bear watching. Now, due to his camping in this area, Tim was frequently pulled up by rangers on at least 7 different violations of the park's rules. So this included improper food storage. So they say that when you are camping in bear country, you need to have containers that lock, that the bear can't open them, can't smell them. He would use harassment tactics for the visitors to try and chase them away. He was not moving his campsite 1 mile away each time, which is again a really common thing. They say the same with crocodiles. If you end up, I don't know why you would want to do it, but if you do go and do camping near a river which happens to have crocodiles in, so it'd be Australia, Africa and America, they say to move your tent a mile down each time to try and throw the crocodiles off, and he wasn't doing this. He would actually take visitors on guides himself, even though he wasn't licensed to. He refused to use the terror, so they told him, if you are going to do this, you need to put up electric fencing around your tent, and you also need to carry mace or bear spray, and he would also refuse to do this. He would also ignore the 50-yard rule between him and the bears, and the 100-yard rule for female bears with small cubs. And there's a couple of videos where he frequently is seen with a female bear and her cubs, and he watches the cubs grow up over a period of time. Another animal that he really gained a fondness for and a passion were the foxes, and he would feed them from his tent, and along with the bears he also names the foxes. And the bears in the first area, you know, he's given like really cute names like Freckle and Cookie and things like that. And later on, when he starts discovering the bigger bears, the more ferocious, shall we say, he's using the names like Big Red Machine, Satan, Demon to describe these bears. So between the summer stays between 1990 to 2003, Tim recorded over 100 hours of footage from the camp. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment. I'm going to play you some of that footage.
Let me tell you, honestly, camping in grizzly country is dangerous. People who camp in grizzly country should camp out in the open to let the bears know where the tent is. My camp is unseen. It is the most dangerous camping, the most dangerous living in the history of the world by any human being. I have lived longer with wild brown grizzly bears without weapons. Hi, Spirit. Hello, baby. He's now moving away from me. I've now proven myself as being able to hold my ground and therefore earning the respect. This is Rowdy the bear, and he's Rowdy. Excuse me. Hey. It's okay. It's okay. Okay. I didn't mean to get in your way. Oh, he's a big bear. He's a big bear. A very big bear. Wow. Let's have some water, Christ man, or Allah, or Hindu floaty thing. Let's have some fucking water for these animals! September 21st, Thursday of the year 2000, Expedition 2000. I am the Lord's humble servant. I am Allah's disciple. I am the floaty thing's go-for boy. It has rained. We're gonna need more rain. We need more rain! Downey is hungry! Tabitha's hungry! Melissa is eating her babies! I'm like a fucking nut.
Now, once summer was over for that particular year, bears, obviously, they started preparing for their long hibernation in winter. So Tim would obviously return home, and he would actually be invited to schools to give a presentation on what he had learned and what he had documented. And he would actually do this free of charge. He wouldn't expect any money from this. And both him and Joel, they discuss how they can turn this project into something a lot bigger. And they set up a non-profit organisation called Grizzly People, and this was dedicated to protecting the bears that Tim stated that he was only there to study. Now, these claims were refuted by bear biologists, and they basically use the argument that what Tim had documented they didn't already know from watching the bears themselves. What Tim had documented they labelled as easy stuff, and Tim reiterated that he was trying to protect the bears from poachers. He wasn't a bear biologist. In one clip of footage, he finds a bear trap, and this is like this enormous sort of framework that's put up and set up in the forest. And obviously, this is not only designed for bears, it's for like larger animals like moose and elk. And the idea is obviously to hang them up and obviously skin them, prepare their meat. And like I said, obviously the last recorded bear poaching operation in Katmai had happened in 1970. So Tim, he begins gaining a recognition. He's featured in documentaries, he's featured in People magazine, and him and Joel, they co-write a book called Among Grizzlies, and this was released in 1997. And Tim states that without this media, people would still be going into grizzly maze and killing the animals for sport. He gets celebrity sponsors for his charities. These include people like Pierce Brosnan, and Leonardo DiCaprio even donates $25,000. And this money is used to fund his stays in Katmai to provide better sort of education for people. In 1998, Tim produces his only known proof of hunting within Katmai, and he basically sees a man walking through Katmai with a shotgun. He takes a picture of this, and it's printed on a pamphlet by the company Patagonia. If you're not sure what Patagonia is, it was a US-based sort of sportswear company, and you know they would advertise things like camping equipment and hiking. Really infamous photos I'm going to post here. Don't worry, the baby is still alive. There was an Instagram post about that picture, and she's blossomed into this incredible young woman. The man in that picture, so the one with the shotgun, I wasn't able to find this picture, I really did try and find it. He was actually a park ranger. Sorry, he was a bear guy, sorry, not a park ranger. And Tim actually knew this man. So he sold this image on to Patagonia. And when Patagonia find out, they pull the image off from their pamphlet. Tim continues to use the image even after Patagonia take back their funding. And in the mid-90s, Tim, his chosen bay is becoming more and more hotspots for tourists. He decides to take his camp further down into Kafflia Bay. Now, the bears in Kafflia Bay, they weren't as welcoming and not as habitualised to humans as what they had been in the Hollow Maze. But he decides to keep returning to this particular spot year after year from there on. Tim is challenged by more defensive bears. I'm going to say defensive rather than aggressive. All these sources that I could find, whether it would be documentaries and other sources citing aggression. To me, it's not aggression. They're defending their territory, they're defending their food, they're defending their babies. But he was finding more and more defensive bears. And like I said, obviously he was using names like Cookie, Tabitha, Freckles, things like that. He was now calling them Big Red Machine, Demon, Satan. And his pilot, Willie Fulton, said of Tim, he was a different person to how he was in Hallow Bay at this point. On the occasion someone did spot Tim in Cathliar, they said that Tim would run at them on all fours, growling like a bear. He would try and stand up to as tall as he could to try and appear really intimidating. Others say they would see him swimming naked in the salmon streams. And other occasions he would just be really pleasant. He would come out and talk to them. He would guide them around. And there was an occasion when one person sort of challenged him. So they were doing their usual rounds of the park and they come across a bear cub that had been killed. So they go and find Tim, they knock on his tent, there's no answer. They're trying to call Tim out, no answer, and eventually they say, "Oh Tim, one of your bears is dead." Tim just sort of gets up at that point. He exits the tent and the person sort of tries to make a sort of gallows humour joke, and they're like, "I thought you was trying to look after these animals, I thought you was trying to save them." And Tim just sort of looks at him and goes, "Well, it's just nature." In 2000, Tim is on a bay in Hyder, Alaska. This is situated really close to glacial mountains, and at the bottom of this is a lake chock full of salmon. This particular area is only accessible from a road that leads to British Columbia and the borders of Canada. And around here there is a little small settlement as well, so there's a couple of hotels and shops and restaurants and whatnot. And because obviously people knew of Tim, this sort of invited other people to start trying to do what Tim was doing. They wanted to go camping in the wilderness. And one particular person, his name was George Toulas, he was 41 years old. He's a local waiter and he sets up a makeshift camp. And literally the picture that I could find of this camp, it looks a bit like tarpaulin just put over a pole. So, July 14th, 2000, George hears a noise in the night and he sticks his head out to investigate, and literally within 10 seconds of him doing that, within just him sticking his head out, he's pulled out of the tent by a bear. Now, officials, they stated that they were aware of this bear, of a particular bear that they were worried about, should I say. He was described as a subadult male, and if you know anything about bear behaviour, the subadult males are the ones that you do need to watch out for. Because even though they are a little bit smaller, they're aged between the ages of like 2 to maybe 4 years old, maybe a little bit older. But they're the bears that sort of feel like they have something to prove. And they might try and challenge a bigger, older, meaner male. But the older males will sort of more likely to retreat than go. Whereas the subadult is the one that tends to be a bit more defensive over their territory. And they said that a particular bear had been showing defensive attitude to other guests and other bears, but this was only to actually steal their food from the campsite. So they set up traps to try and euthanize the bear. And when George's body was found, they said that his arm had been ripped off, the bear had ripped into his hip, completely ripped into his face, and parts of his body had been consumed. So, workers from a local sawmill, they get together. So the bear traps had completely fouled. So sawmill workers, they get together and they hunt down the bear that they believe killed George, and they shoot him dead. So like I said, George was 41 years old at this time. And the news articles that announcing his death, they're still online to this day, so 26 years later. But I wasn't able to find any pictures of George, and I really wanted to include them because I wanted to put a face to the name, and there was literally just nothing available of him online. So obviously he's only remembered in name only, apart from obviously the people that did actually know him. But for everyone else, obviously he's just remembered in name. Now, by 2000, Tim was a regular fixation on TV. He appeared on David Letterman's show twice. He appeared on Rosie O'Donnell's talk show. And various reports began making their way to the leadership of Katmai National Park. They started getting like really bizarre complaints about Tim. One of these was that Tim was spotted in a full tuxedo actually dancing with the bears. He was seen holding light reflectors and swirling them around, like described as a whirling dervish. And the superintendent of the park, her name was Deb Liggett, she arranges a meeting with Tim. Now, she tells him in no uncertain terms that he really needs to stop doing what he's doing. She calls it bear whispering. She tells him to stop harassing them. And she says that if any failure to comply with this, she's going to go to the park solicitor and actually have him banned. And Tim, he does agree to Deb's demands. He agrees to stop what he's doing. She then tells him, I'll never forgive you, and my staff will never forgive you if your actions result in us having to shoot one of these bears. And she said that after saying this, Tim began to cry. Not long after this, she is informed about Tim appearing on the Tom Snyder show, where she says that he's the bear's sole protector, from what he calls machine gun wielding poachers. He then shows videos of him approaching the bears, like going up really close and personal with them. And this really pisses Deb off. So she goes up to the lawyers and she pieces together a ton of information, a ton of evidence. And she wants Tim banned from the park. I don't think it would have deterred him, but this is her actions. But she's declined. This request is declined. Tim, he sends her numerous letters reiterating his intentions, and he describes that some of her rangers also get really close to the bears. He suggests to her making a new position just for him and calling it Bear Guardian. And he will even do this for free. He doesn't want any money for this. And he waves away even liability. He waves away that he's the one that's going to be blamed for his death, not the park. And this is also denied. So when Tim goes home after that summer's trip, he requests that the classes that he teaches all send in letters to Deb to back up his requests. And they do. Again, these are denied. And a particular letter comes in March of 2001. And this Deb described as a passionate plea for Tim's work. And this was by a lady called Amie Hueganard. Now, again, Amy's letter is... we are going to go into Amie in a second. But Amy's letter is also ignored. So Tim then reiterates with this video in response. I'm going to pause here for a second.
I beat you. I'm the champion. I'm the fucking champion. I beat you. I beat your fucking asses. You fucking losers. Fucking nobodies. Fuck. Fucking fucks. In 2 months. How dare they? How dare they challenge me? How dare they smear me in their campaigns? How dare they? When they do not look after these animals. And I come here in peace and in love, neutral, in respect. I will continue to do this. I will fight them. I will be an American dissident if I need be. There's a patriotic time going on right now, but as far as this fucking government's concerned, fuck you, motherfucking Park Service.
Now Treadwell cross.
So Amie Lynn Hueganard, she was born on October the 23rd, 1965, and this was in Buffalo, New York. And at some point, the family later moved to Indiana. Now, her family I don't really know anything about her family life other than the fact that she had a sister. Mainly because the family did request to stay private during this. So obviously we just have to respect their privacy. But the information about Amie is sourced in books that I have read and is sourced in documentaries. So Amie, she was born October 23rd, like I said. She was described as a shy person, but she was really well liked. And growing up, she showed a passion for the outdoors, even really young. As a teenager and a young woman, she attended the University of Colorado in Boulder. And most of her classmates, they would be going out after their studies and doing, the usual student things when they're at university and college. They've got that little bit of freedom. Amie, she would spend most of her free time outdoors hiking, and this was even though she was only 5 foot tall and about 100 pounds. She was described as really tough. She graduated with a degree in molecular cellular developmental biology. She went on to study for a master's degree. She then goes into gain her doctorate. For getting her doctorate, she worked as a physician assistant in Colorado. Now, after hiking the Grand Tetons, she gains a keen interest in bears. And one day in 1999, she's in a bookstore. And in this bookstore, she comes across Tim and Jules' book, Among Grizzlies. Same year, Tim is invited to give a talk at Amy's university. And for Amie, this was reportedly an instant attraction for her. And she also became instantly attracted to Tim. Obviously this was this young woman listening to a man who had the same sort of interests as her. He was a bit older, a bit more experienced, so there was almost a 10-year age gap between them. And January 2000, she writes him a letter to say as much that she really likes what he does and she's really attracted to him. And she ends the letter with her phone number. And Tim calls her, and a friendship sort of forms from this. And they then start dating when Tim returns from his summer 2000 trip. Now, reportedly, and again, these women have requested to stay private, but some did come forward to say that they also had joined Tim in previous expeditions. And Tim would actually brag about this during one appearance on the Tom Snyder Show. He describes an occasion where he and a girlfriend of his happened to be having sex in the tent whilst listening to two bears having sex outside. In 2001, Amie joins him on that summer's trip. They spend 1 week in Hallow Bay, 1 week in the Grizzly Maze, and she then goes and tells friends when she gets back, "You haven't lived until you've taken a bath with a grizzly bear." After their first shared experience in 2001, they then make it their couple thing, their relationship official, and they start making plans to move into an apartment together. She takes leave from work in summer of 2002 to join him on that year's expedition, and she later finds a job as a doctor's personal assistant. She begins making final touches to their new home. She buys a new bed, but she refuses to actually sleep on the bed until Tim returns. In 2003, Amie is now 37, Tim's 46. She makes plans for him to visit him twice during his stay in Alaska. July in Grizzly Sanctuary, September in Grizzly Maze. However, reports say that Tim, whilst he was alone out there, he was telling people that he was actually single. Kathleen Parker, she's a resident in Alaska. Now, she become quite friendly with Tim, and she would actually keep his belongings when he returned from the trips. She would store his camping equipment at her house. She states that although Tim would talk about girlfriends, he actually never mentioned Amie's name. In footage that Tim shoots this year, he talks about being alone. However, Amie is actually spotted in 2 separate shots. She quickly ducks out of the way of the camera. In early 2003, Tim is approached by Disney for 2 separate projects. One is a short film, and the other one was the film Brother Bear. This was actually released in October of 2003, and Tim advised the animators on how bears moved and all that. Summer of 2003, Tim and Amie spent their first month of the trip in Hallow Bay, and then they moved on to the Grizzly Maze as before. They proceed the trip. Tim had met with several well-known bear biologists, and they had actually showed concern about Tim's safety. And he did actually take their words to heart, and again they reiterated about his failure to use bear spray. And Tim said in his diary that at one point he did use bear spray in the past, but he felt such an enormous amount of guilt about using the bear spray because the bear was in so much pain that he just basically refused to use it ever again. Now, in the Grizzly Maze, Tim notes that there's more bear activity than what is usual, and these include some bears he's ever actually seen before. Amie, she writes in her diary that was found at the campsite after what we're going to be discussing, that she was actually scared of these bears and she wanted to go home, but for unknown reasons she ends up staying with Tim. Soon as autumn was getting closer and all the bears start going into what we call hyperphagia. Hyperphagia is basically when an animal that does hibernate during the winter, they will spend the autumn months eating as much food as they possibly can. And food is starting to get a little bit scarce because obviously the weather turning colder, vegetation starts dying off. The salmon have moved upstream, they've gone to other places. All that's left behind are salmon that have died. And at this time of year, because food is getting a bit more scarce, the bears are showing a bit more of a defensive and aggressive nature. In September, Tim writes in his journal concerns about his favourite bear, and this was a female bear called Downy. And Tim had actually watched Downy grow up over the past 7 years from a cub. However, during his search of her, he eventually does find her hiding from the larger males. The trip that year was noted to have been really heavy rainfall, and due to this, so Amie was due to meet him in the September of that year, but because of the rainfall, her trip got delayed. So she's hiding out and staying in a hotel. And a waiter, he recalled in conversation that Amie and him had, that Amie told him it was going to be her final ever trip. On September 26th, 2003, pilot Willie Fulton, he arrives, he takes Amie out to where Tim is. They spend a few days together, and then on September 26th, he returns to collect Tim and Amie for them to return home. And Willie said that he noted that Amie seemed to be really relieved and really happy to be leaving. But Tim wasn't, because Tim said that Downey had actually gone missing again. So Willie drops them off at Kathleen Parker's. They put away their camping gear and make their way to the airport. And a popular theory, so many sources have stated that Tim got into a row whilst he was at the airport about validity. Sorry, I can't say that word. About how valid his ticket was. But there was one source which stated that they actually went and spoke to airport staff after what we're going to be discussing happened. And airport staff didn't recall any sort of row happening. So for what I'm going to say is that for unknown reasons, the couple decided to go back to Grizzly Maze. So they go back to Kathleen, pick up their stuff. Willie drops them off, and he agrees to pick them up sometime in October. They return to the maze on September 29th. They spend the next week looking for Downey. They find her alive, safe and well, hiding out again in a new place. October 4th that year, so October 4th 2003, this was documented as a really clear day. Tim calls for pick-up arrangement for the 6th of October. On the 5th of October, Tim phones Jewel to update her on that day's events and any other updates about the bears. And 2 hours after this phone call, so around 1 PM, they prepare their camp for the rain. They slowly start packing things away, and they start preparing some food. Now, just to highlight as well, at this time of year in Alaska, is when it's, bearing in mind obviously we're talking about 1 PM, 1:30 in the afternoon, but it actually starts getting dark around this time in Alaska. And so Amie opens up a pack of sausages, she's cooking this, and Tim hears a noise from outside. He tells Amie to stay in the tent, and he goes and investigates. I do also want to point out as well, obviously I highlighted earlier that Tim was spoken to a few times about improper food storage. And also about his camping, and it is said by many people who have worked with bears that you should always have 2 campsites, so one to sleep in and one to store your food in and actually cook your food at, and these need to be some distance apart from each other. Obviously Tim was cooking his food in the same tent that he was actually sleeping in. So, like I said, Tim goes out to investigate, and next thing you know, Amie hears him screaming. Now, for some reason, she just literally picks up the camcorder, and obviously, because she had done this so many times previously, she flicks on the record button, but for an unknown reason, she doesn't actually take off the lens cap. She goes outside, and the time recording was at 1:53 PM. She sees Tim obviously being attacked by the bear. The audio catches everything that happened. Amie is screaming for Tim to play dead. And this eventually does seem to work. The bear starts to retreat. Amie goes to help Tim, and there seems to be about a minute conversation. The bear then returns and resumes its attack on Tim. Amie backs away and the bear continues mauling and biting Tim. He's shouting at Amie to hit the bear with something, and she picks up the nearest thing that she can find, which is a cast iron skillet, or a frying pan, sorry, a really large frying pan. She starts hitting the bear on the head, and next thing it heard is some dragging noises. So this indicates that the bear was dragging Tim away. Tim then tells Amie to run. Then Amie screams. But at this point, the audio in the tape recording, it cuts out, indicating that the film had run out. So, October the 6th, the day Willie agreed to pick up Amie and Tim. He's concerned as Tim hasn't called him on the satellite phone as he usually did. He arrives at the camping spot. He spots that the tent has been completely flattened and there seems to have been some sort of disturbance, but he can't pinpoint what is going on. He then ends up having a small interaction with a bear. A bear does charge at him, and Willie, he manages to make it back to his plane safe and sound. He jumps in the plane, he starts circling the area, and he spots in a clearing the same bear that attacked him. This was the only bear that seemed to be in the vicinity, and he just continues circling, and he notices that the bear is chewing on something. So he sort of like goes a little bit lower, and he sees that it's actually a human ribcage. So Willie contacts the park ranger at this point, and this man was called Joel Ellis. He relays what he has just seen. So Joel and two other rangers, they meet Willie at a safer spot. They contact Alaska State Troopers, and they arm themselves with some guns, and they take a walk to the campsite. They wait for the troopers at a small distance from the site when one of the rangers yells bear, and they see a particularly large male bear charging towards them, and they try everything they can to try and deter the bear from attacking. The bear doesn't listen, so they end up opening fire, and it takes 19 shots for the bear to finally die. The bear does get back up at one point, so they continue shooting. And Willie recognises this as the same bear that he had actually seen from earlier. They make it up the campsite. The camp, like I said, it's been flattened. And they notice a mound of earth next to the camp. In this mound of earth, they start digging through. They start finding fingers. They find an arm, and the next thing they find is a kidney. They further excavate this, and this is called a bear cache. And what this is just bears, once they've eaten enough food to fill them up for that particular time, they will store food in the earth to try and deter other predators from smelling it out. So one ranger, he starts making his way back to the bear that they had shot, and he discovers what is left of Tim. He finds his arm with a watch still attached to it, and also they find Tim's head, which is still slightly attached to his upper torso. It's just like a flap of skin at this point. He noted that the head had been scalped. There was part of the spine still attached to his neck, with the connecting shoulders and the forearms. Further in the cache, the troops discover Amie's head, her torso, and what they described as just scraps. They bag up the remains. They are then disturbed by a smaller sub-adult bear who, like I said, they are the ones that tend to be a bit more defensive because they have a point to prove. So unfortunately they do have to shoot him dead. They return a couple of days later on October the 8th to inspect the two bears to try and uncover more remains. They find the smaller sub-adult bear has been torn apart and his parts of his body have already been cached, and all that's left behind is his head. And he's estimated to have been about 3 years old. The larger bear, he had actually been tracked and tattooed quite a few number of years previously. Now, I do want to point out that there was discussion about it being particularly a bear called Ollie that Tim was actually quite worried about. Now, this particular bear had been tattooed in his inner lip as Bear 141. And when they did the autopsy on the bear, they noticed that he did have human remains inside him. But if you know anything about bear behaviour, or any other predator for that matter, you will know that just because an animal has remains inside of it, it doesn't mean that necessarily the animal that has killed that particular animal or a particular person. A really big thing, if you know anything about lions or even bears, you know, they will make the kill, but another animal can easily chase them away and claim that kill as their own. And this is what I believe is more common, and this is what probably happened. I don't think it was particularly that bear that did kill Amie and Tim. I strongly believe that, you know, he's just taken over that particular day's hunt because it's an easier meal for him. I'm just going to pause here for a second. I'm going to play you a clip of Tim with Oli and then to finish.
Is the old bear, one who is struggling for survival, and an aggressive one at that, who is the one that you must be very careful of. For these are the bears that on occasion do, for survival, kill and eat humans. Could Oli, the big old bear, possibly kill and eat Timothy Treadwell? What do you think, Oli? I think if you were weak around him, you're going down his gullet, going down the pipe. Well, the expedition coming close to close, but I'm still, of course, here. It's been over 4 months in the wilderness, and a hurricane force storm now building, over 50-mile-an-hour winds, soon over 70. The bears safely heading for their dens, the work successful. I'm over 20 pounds lighter. My clothes are rags. I've tried hard. I bleed for them. I live for them. I die for them. I love them. I love this. It's tough work. But it's the only work I know, and it's the only work I'll ever want.
Okay, so like I said, the bear had been tattooed as Bear 141. They recover 30 pounds of human remains. And like I said, they had a strong suspicion that this was the bear that killed Tim and Amie, but as I've just highlighted, I don't think that's the case. In 2005, so 2 years later, because like I said, obviously there would have been an investigation into what happened, but it's quite clear what had happened, so they had spent a lot of time on this. As devastating as it was for everyone involved, like Tim's family, for Jewel, for Amie's family, you know, Amie's sister did speak out and say that Amie had died where, according to Amie, in the most beautiful place on earth. It's still devastating, but, you know, the inquest and everything was a foregone conclusion. 2005, the film Grizzly Man is released, and this depicts Joel Palabac listening to the audio for the first ever time. Just to highlight that Joel did actually become Tim's power of attorney, and she was also the heir to his estate. There are rumours that there was some sort of falling out between Tim and his family, and they never reconciled. But from what I understand, his mum and dad actually refuted those claims, so I don't know the full ins and outs of that particular thing. So she allows the director to listen to the audio tape, and he basically reiterates that no one should ever listen to this. It's absolutely awful. He urges Joel to destroy the tape, and she says that she is going to. She, however, seems to have put it in a safety deposit box in a bank. Now, I do want to stop here for a moment just to say that there are some accounts on Instagram, there are some accounts on TikTok who claim that they have that recording and they've actually posted it online. Everyone in Tim's family, everyone who has actually listened to the tape, so there were some copies made. It seems like the copies were destroyed. But the people that have actually heard the original tape have said what they listened to was a lot worse than what has been posted online. They, quite rightly, they're saying that what is online is a fake, and they're urging people not to listen to it. I have listened to what is online. I did download it for the purpose of this film. I'm not going to put it in. If it is fake, I don't want to spread false information. I have listened to it. It's really easy to find. You guys can go search for it. But if it is a fake, then I'm not going to put it in this video. In the official reports, 3 factors are listed as the reason for the attack. So number 1, Tim had placed his campsite in the worst possible place. Second was the time of year, so bears are going into hyperphagia, they're going to show more food aggression, they're going to be showing more defensive nature. And the third was the improper food storage. Like I said, obviously because they're trying to get as much calories as possible, they are going to smell an easy meal and going to be attracted by that. And obviously I already reiterated that they told him to have 2 separate camps, which he failed to do, which is a big no-no when you are camping with bears. Obviously, because technically in the eyes of the law there were no laws broken, I do strongly believe that Tim's luck would have run out. For all intents and purposes, I've been reading a lot that Tim deserved what he got. I don't think that's the case. I don't think he deserved to go the way he did. Obviously, Amie was a complete victim in all of this. She reiterated she didn't want to be there. And yes, his actions did put her in harm's way. I strongly believe that if he hadn't died from the bear, the events on October that year, on October 2003, hadn't have happened, I do believe that he would have been held responsible for human endangerment, for obviously habituating wild animals to humans. Because this has happened before. And like I said at the start of this video, there have been some numerous shark attacks recently because of people's inability to stay out of shark habitat. There have been over the years, there have been quite a few cases of foxes attacking humans because foxes are becoming a bit too habitualised with human beings and they end up going into homes and attacking babies. So I believe that, I strongly, in my opinion, believe that he would have faced charges eventually to do with human endangerment. But I don't think he deserves to go the way he did. But maybe your opinion is different. I will ask that you be a little bit respectful and tactful if you do are going to leave an opinion. If you think that your opinion is different to mine, feel free to comment, but just be a little bit tactful and respectful, because we don't know who comes across these videos and reads the comments, and the last thing they want is to see some negativity towards their particular family member. We don't have to agree with his actions, I certainly don't, but I believe, for all intents and purposes, he had a good heart, and he strongly believed that he was doing good for the Bears, and ended up losing his life in the worst possible way. And like I said earlier, I know that this isn't really true crime related, but I believe that some charges would have ended up happening. So, just to finish off here, guys, just a huge thank you to you all. So like I said, please leave a comment down below. I always get back to you guys. Please share and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And I'll be back really soon with the next true crime story with Silhouette. Let me know what you guys think down below, and I'll see you real soon.